What is up, my ninjas? I am Strydent, and today is a momentous occasion. After years and years of kind of begging and telling and yelling and complaining and explaining to Hasbro that all we want in our Marvel Legends line is to be able to finish some of our teams, and that the major team that we want to be able to finish is the 90s X-Men, because we need a 90s Jim Lee style Cyclops. Those prayers, those complaints have finally been answered. Now, a lot of you may not understand exactly why this character is so important to so many of us. Some of you might know him strictly from video games, and you may have not really read the comics during this era. But essentially, the Jim Lee era 90s Cyclops is the leader archetype. For a lot of modern teams, for a lot of teams after this point, just the way he would be positioned in an image became the template for how other leaders would show up in their comics, and clean-cut leaders, how they would act. This is the figure that started it all. This was Toy Biz way back in the early 90s. They did so many different versions from every single comic happening, crossover, whatever, that existed at the time. They did it. And it was pretty cool that they did, because it felt like they were actually paying attention to what was going on in the comic space at the time. This was my favorite, obviously because it is the Jim Lee style, but it also was colored like the cartoon in the video game. There were so many others, by the time, the films came out, which I purposefully left those figures out because the movies are garbage and I don't even want to talk about it. This is probably the closest you'll get to one of the movie films in this, or movie figures in this video. But there were so many versions, and once, Hasbro took over, after Toy Biz gave us this turd, you saw all those different versions of the figure, even the early Toy Biz versions. Why did we end up with this? So for a long time, this was the only representation of the Jim Lee style 90s era Cyclops. I never understood why. Never. Finally, Hasbro took over, and this was what they started giving us, and it was like they deliberately ignored the 90s version, even though that was the version that we were asking for. No one was asking for modern Cyclops because the costume was forgettable. All the costumes he's had since switching out of, the Ultimate X-Men inspired costume that he had back in those days, they've all been lame, They even went back and gave us this. Then we all saw these cool images of the 90s era Cyclops, and we're like, yes, finally they're doing it. But no, the catch was that he was a 3 3/4 inch figure. But finally, they've decided to give us what we've been asking for. I told you guys last year this was one of the legends I'm going to search out this year, and I already have. I'm planning on getting another one just in case, because I will be playing with this guy. It's a beautiful figure. He's not without some flaws, don't get me wrong. Hasbro always does the, 2 steps forward and 200 steps back kind of approach to making action figures. But seeing him amidst the 90s team, seeing him amidst those characters, the style from that time, that is heartwarming for people like me. So anyway, sit back, relax, and let me start off by showing you the issues that this figure has. Okay, so let's talk about the problems with this figure. As soon as you open the figure, you get him out of the blister, this is what you're stuck with. A hero whose parts of his costume look like they're too big for him. Like he stole these pieces of these straps, these belts, everything. Like he stole them from a bigger character. Or like they weren't intended for a bigger figure and they were put on this smaller figure. And everything just ends up at his ankles. It's embarrassing, and I was kind of like, are you serious? Other people had complained, but I thought when they complained and just said, they're not sculpted pieces, I thought they would at least be kind of fabricated in a way that they stay around, the particular area that they're supposed to stay on. Kind of like maybe a flap goes in between the joints or whatever, but they don't. None of that shit was like that, and this is kind of it's 2017. You could have sculpted that. There are customs in which they sculpted all these pieces directly onto the figure. they didn't really even need to tool new pieces. I mean, they'd have to do new legs and or modified legs and modified torsos, but they even the cuffs are floating pieces on the arms. Another problem I have is that he does not come with any accessories pertaining to his person unless you count the straps as accessories. And his stink finger is problematic because you need to have another hand so that he can have two fists, or he can have a holding things hand, or he can, have a gesturing hand, or, any number of hands. I mean, as it is, this just looks like he, put his hand in his own ass or somebody else's ass and happened to be unfortunate enough to smell that hand, those fingers, and, end up being repulsed. And I get what it's for, don't get me wrong. But, as you know, he can activate the visor without touching it. The other pair of hands I think he should have had were these chopping hands. They already exist. I took these off of an old previous Captain America figure. These would be awesome if he had two of these for the charge-up pose from X-Men versus Street Fighter and Marvel versus Capcom 2, I think it is. I mean, wouldn't it be dope to sit there and put him in that pose, I started trying to figure out how to do it, so I took a hand from one of my DC collectibles figures that I don't use, and I put that other, the Captain America hand on just to see if they would even fit. And it fit. It looks pretty decent, Maybe I will paint these things as time goes on. We'll see. But I feel like this is something they should have added with the, with the figure standard. He also should have had a pointing hand. I mean, come on, he's a leader. That should be something all leader figures come with standard. I already showed you an image of him amidst his team standing triumphantly pointing at the enemy. So, fail on that respect or that part. Now, when it comes to the sculpt overall, this guy, once you glue down the parts or once you have the parts in place, he looks amazing. He looks the part. It's such a simple design. That's why I'm kind of, I'm harsh on the approach. I've seen so many customs done of this figure that it amazes me that Hasbro could still, after having the advantage of seeing all of those, they could still turn out their version and still have things wrong with the figure, with the approach to the figure. But anyway, once everything is fastened and glued in place and whatnot, you have the spitting image of Jim Lee's Cyclops. Initially, I thought he would be bigger, but I guess this fits considering he's supposed to be slim, as his nickname is. I like it. I like it a lot. The joints are very stiff. They hold in place the way they're supposed to. It is the tried and true Bucky cap mold, which is truly the great, new body mold that Hasbro gave to us. All the details are there, although some are inconsistent, with a leathery texture appearing on his foot, but not on the rest of the boot. But overall, I mean, you just want to see this. So seeing this makes me extremely happy, and it makes me feel like this purchase was worth it. The paint, what paint I have on him was done very well. It was there wasn't much of anything out of the lines, or overspray or whatever. There is kind of that orangish color to his straps, which is kind of weird, but it works when you light him a certain way. It should have been yellow, but it matches the yellow on some of the other characters, so go figure, Overall, very well done. Very well done in that respect. Now we come to his accessories. Homeboy comes with no accessories for himself, just the Build-A-Figure. I'm tired of Build-A-Figures. I kind of wish they would just scrap the Build-A-Figure and give them stuff like the chopping hand, like I said before, for the charge-up pose, or for, come on poses, or just, for, acrobatic poses and such. And then the pointing hand for leader poses. He's a leader. They should be pointing. Also, if you have the Walgreens exclusive Daredevil, you can use that extra head as Cyclops without his visor and stuff on. It's kind of a tight fit. The hair is a little bit different color than the hair, on the standard head, but, it works. My son pointed out that it looked like Hawkeye, and I'm like, wow, he even noticed it. But, there it is. Now let's compare. One of the things that I was kind of using as a comparison or using as a stick by which to measure if things were right was Wolverine standing side by side with Cyclops. And this Wolverine is still a little bit tall. He still comes off, a bit shorter, but he's still, in my opinion, too tall considering what you see in the comics. That being said, seeing the two of them standing, next to one another is still pretty awesome. It would have been nice to have, an extra belt for Wolverine with the X instead of the buckle, but it doesn't make that big of a difference. Seeing Cyclops next to Jean, they're proper height to one another. I'm going to be customizing my Jean to make her look more like what Jean is supposed to look like, because I hate how scrawny and weird she looks, But yeah, the three of them together, they all look really good. They're the right size overall, or at least a comparable size, so they don't look too out of place when you have them next to one another. That's what I've wanted to see for a long time. The blues and the yellows on Psych match the blues and yellows on Jean. Storm and Cyclops. Now this is where there's a big difference, because for whatever reason they didn't give us that white version of Storm in the new robust thick body. This is the best I can do with this costume. Maybe a custom is in order, but seeing them together, the details are all there and it's awesome. These are the two legendary leaders of the X-Men. You know what I'm saying? Like, they look good together. They look, she looks majestic and he looks ready. I mean, and that's pretty much the characterization. He's always ready to do what needs to be done to get shit done, because that's the kind of leader he is. He doesn't put anybody in front of him when it comes to dealing with whatever the situation is. He figures it out himself. Same goes for Storm. Storm does the same shit, but she does it majestically. And that's the awesome part about, these two as leader characters for, the X-Men. I really dig the look next to my Ryu, because like I told you, I'm a huge fan of X-Men versus Street Fighter. You guys would remember a similar scene in the intro of that game. But seeing them side by side, you see the type of sculpting and detailing that should be first and foremost in this line. It's not super realistic, but it's not 100% cartoony. It's just stylized enough, and it's just in the center of the two that you get a good, likeness for the characters, I think that the Marvel Legends just need a tad bit more detail, and they would definitely be in that, that area. You see this when I put this Captain America next to Cyclops. They look cool together, but it's almost like the straps on Cap are out of place because they got a good wash on them, and the rest of the figure doesn't have any airbrushing or anything like that. But this is the comparison based on their size and scale, and now you can see this is kind of why I imagined Cyclops to be bigger. In my mind, I thought they were going to put him on this body, but seeing him side by side with Cap, it kind of feels right. It doesn't feel out of place. It feels like he should be smaller than Captain America, muscle-wise, but he's ripped, and that works, he doesn't look out of place that way. And it kind of feels like what we got in the video games, and I like that. That's when I really started paying close attention to the scale, because they exaggerated the scale of a lot of the characters so that you could better understand where they fit body type, body style wise. And for me, that's what it took, seeing them in action on a regular basis, because, you got to admit, comics are melodramatic, and you don't see the characters in action as much as you would like to, if you're an action junkie. Some of you are cool with just listening to exposition all day long, and, this stuff doesn't get to you. Strangely enough, though, all this extra that I'm doing, I didn't see any other videos that did this. I guess this is why, I do what I do. I don't know. But these are the major Cyclopses I had that I give a shit about, and I wanted to compare them. You can tell, obviously, scale has changed from the X-Men versus Street Fighter line to current Marvel Legends, Shit from that to previous Marvel Legends, when Toy Biz had the line. But you can see detail went up, and then it went out the window. Paint went up, then went out the window by the time you got to the Cyclops we have now. They look good, don't get me wrong. They all look good. The details are there. You can even see details that the X-Men versus Street Fighter figure shares with the current new 90s Cyclops. It's just that the color palette, it's like their color palette is just weird. I always felt like he should be interpreted with darker blues that match more of the John Byrne style Cyclops. But for whatever reason, they didn't feel that. They felt it needs to lean more towards the oranges because they wanted to make him match up with the other characters that have yellow or orangish colors on their suits in the line previously. These two standing side by side, you see a lot of things when it comes to detail, and it separates the two and makes them almost in different leagues. I don't want to say they're in different leagues because they're not, but I guess in terms of paint, they really are. In terms of articulation, I prefer the current Marvel Legends articulation scheme because I fucking hate, articulated hands. And a lot of the old school Legends had articulated hands, and this one that you see here with the body condom is no different. It's just the hands, and I get it. They did it so that you could have him actually, reach and touch the visor, and I like that. But for those of us who've been reading the books for a very long time and we're aware of what Cyclops can do, we know that there are release switches in his gloves, so he doesn't actually have to touch the visor. If he can't reach the visor, he can press down on his glove, similar to what Ant-Man does to transform in the films, and he can open the shutter that way. Sometimes it's been characterized that there is no shutter. It's just that he can intensify, and through the lens, he can decide how big or how small he wants to focus that beam, So, I don't know. The lens does make sense because the lens itself could be the piece of ruby quartz that determines the size and whatnot. Here I am getting into the details of how this shit works, when we're supposed to be talking about the size of the figure and whatnot. But detail-wise, looking at this figure, you can see that the detail is all in the previous one. You get close up on the blue, the leotard, unitard of part of his costume. You can see that there's like all kinds of scuffs, and there's a black kind of wash and dry brushing on top of the blue that mimics what you used to see in the comics, where you would see them shade his body parts in black, and then the parts where the light hits would be the blue, so that you get that, musculature, it actually stands out and it doesn't feel overly, just blue, overly blue. As far as the gloves go, the gloves look good. The gloves are not bad. The gloves are pretty well detailed. The old school gloves, which is what we're looking at first, have a ton of detail on them, whereas the new school gloves, which we're about to move to in a second, they don't. They have less detail, and they don't quite look as well painted, if painted at all. They feel more like, almost like an afterthought in some ways. They feel more toyetic on the new school one. Same goes for just the way everything is painted in general. There's folds and wrinkles and seams on the previous one that just aren't there on the new school one. There's wear and tear that makes it look like Cyclops has worn this costume in battle, whereas the 90s style one is pristine and super clean, which I don't really have a huge issue with, but I like when weathering is built into the sculpt. Because even if they didn't dry brush it, at least you would have some roughness, some texture to the sculpt. I mean, you see it on his boot, but you don't see it on the rest of the boot. You see it on the foot part of the boot, but not the tall part of the boot. And that bothers me. It shouldn't be like that. But, it's just the way they do things. Even the straps that go around his ankles, you don't really have, or his calves, I'm sorry, they don't have any detailing. Now, on the X-Men versus Street Fighter version, you see a ton of things these two have in common as far as, stylistically, because, they're drawing from the same era. The difference is here, they tried to modify the Monster Wars or Monster Armor version of the figure to look more and feel more in line with the anime sensibilities that were present in X-Men vs. Street Fighter. The new school one, they're just playing to their own sensibilities. They came up with a mold that looks good, that generalizes the superhero physique, various superhero physiques, and they're just playing to that. So it works for what it is in that case. You know what I mean? And I've told you guys I hate that phrase, but in this case, it works for what they are trying to achieve. It's almost a generalized sense of, you know, the frame, the body style, and everything for this figure. Whereas this one is more specialized because they didn't reuse this body for anyone else. It was just Cyclops. It's one of the things I miss about older figures versus newer figures. They cost more, but you're told all these myths about how it's so ridiculously expensive to pay for, you know, the molds and the casts and whatnot. And it's like, no, it's not. It's still the same. You've just upped the size of a lot of the figures, and some of them you've upped the size only by a few inches. There's other companies making new tooling all the time. Why is it that everybody's trying so hard to game the system? This right here, the Walgreens Daredevil head, you can see the hair on this one matches the hair on the other one, but on the X-Men versus Street Fighter figure, but the skin tones are different. But this is what made me think it could work. Now, granted, there are no other parts of Cyclops' body that are showing through his costume. You can just pull that off, put that head on, and it's fine, you know, as long as that's the image that you're trying to get. But if you previously show him with the other head, then you've kind of screwed yourself. Looking at the boots, you can see there's a step up in detail when it comes to the current Marvel Legends Cyclops. And I mean, that's pretty much par for the course all across the board with this guy. One is more generalized and simple, and the other one is more generalized but a little bit more detailed. Here he is standing next to his brother Havoc, and this one is kind of like, Articulation. Now for the articulation section, I'm not going to go through the articulation with this guy again. It's a Bucky Cap mold, standard Marvel Legends. They're pretty standardized as far as how everything works. If you've seen one Marvel Legends review, you've seen them all when it comes to articulation, if they even cover articulation. So I'm just going to show you, you know, visually, pose-wise, the things that this figure can do so that you can get a feel for, you know, is this a good Cyclops figure or not? The main thing he needs to be able to do is flip, you know, touch his visor, you know, look like he can twist his waist and throw a punch or something like that. And some of these poses are combinations of those things. He has to also be able to look thorough and heroic when he stands still, because that's what you're going to have him do a lot of the time. Stand still and direct the rest of the team, or jump in the way and kind of take over, because he does, you know, strategize, but he also tends to lead from the front line as opposed to, you know, from the background. As you can see, I was able to simulate some of his moves, a lot of his moveset from, you know, the Capcom games, and I'm pretty, you know, cool with it. You know, I'm cool with what I was able to do. I'm cool with how he looks doing it. I mean, it's nothing special here as far as articulation goes, you know, no extra hidden joints or anything like that, but he really doesn't need it. He just needs to be a well-made, strong figure that can pose dynamically. And now we come to the bottom line. Straight up and down, this was a winner, even if they botched the whole thing or not, because of the fact that they made us wait so long for them to even consider doing it. And now that we have him in hand, I think that the problems he has are minimal. They're still indicative of Hasbro's approach. We know they're going to do the cheapest, most lackluster job when it comes to making these things a reality. So, you know, these straps not being fastened to the figure, it seemed like they were par for the course. I kind of, in the back of my mind, expected something to be off. If you can get past that and even glue the stuff in place, you shouldn't have to, but considering what we're given, you do. If you can get past that, you have a great figure. I'm geeked. I was going to buy him regardless because I didn't want to pay the customizer price or prices for, you know, the same figure. You know, essentially done pretty close to the same way. Paying upwards of, you know, $100 or $80 to $100 for this figure, you know, done the same way, just done by other people, but like, you know, with little things done differently, it just doesn't seem altogether right. So I was going to buy the Hasbro version regardless, because I don't have that kind of money. If you have that kind of money, then by all means, get a custom, don't worry about this thing. In terms of us regular people, I think it's fine. I like the way it looks, I like what it does, it feels good to see him part of the team, and I'm happy. So this has been my review of the Marvel Legends Jim Lee Cyclops. It's the Warlock Wave figure. He's in stores right now. I've seen him at Target. So if you can find him, pick him up. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Peace outside. Thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed what you saw, please give it a like, a share, let your friends know. Check me out on social media. All the links are in the description. And if you really want to help me out big time, jump on Patreon and support the channel. Every little bit helps, the smallest amount to the largest amount. And last but not least, check out my comic, War of the Gods. Issue 2 is on sale now on Indie Planet. And the links are in the description. It's some superhero fun. And as a smaller independent book, it needs all the views, all the eyes on it as possible. So check it out, show it to your friends. Every view helps greatly. And yeah, that's it for me. Thanks again.